Entitled customer dislocated my finger, keeps on shopping. Pre-COVID, I worked at a big club warehouse in customer service. The job was great and members were usually awesome. But every now and then, you'd find the most entitled sons of bees to ever walk the earth. Based on the way they treated me and others, I can only assume they don't even see us as human. We were only lifelike robots built to ring up their items and load their carts. One such incident that proves my assumption happened on a super busy Saturday. It was pouring outside. Members were fighting over parking close to the door, then bolting for the entrance as if their lives depended on it. As a courtesy to members, on rainy days we always had someone outside in the front of the cart return bay to drive the carts. This day was so busy, members were coming in faster than I could dry carts for them. Most were super nice and patient. They waited in line for a dry one, and almost everyone thanked me. A few who were in a hurry or didn't care about dry carts just skipped the line and grabbed a wet one. One such member rushed up and grabbed a wet cart from behind me. Sometimes carts get jammed or snagged together. Usually, it's the buckles for the kiddie seats getting tangled, but sometimes it's a warp in the cart from damage. This poor member grabbed one such warped cart, and it dragged its buddy with it. The member attempted to dislodge it. He yanked, he twisted, he shook them violently. He looked at me and demanded, "Help me get these carts separated." I offered him a dry one instead. Nope. He wanted that cart specifically for some reason. I abandoned my drying rag and attempted to pry the carts apart. It was like trying to separate two buffaloes in a horn log. They refused to budge. I looked at the metal flap that allowed the carts to nest into each other. I saw where it was snagged and reached in to coax it free. I placed my other hand on the lip of the second cart to give me leverage while I untangled them. The member demanded loudly, "Come on, I'm in a hurry." He decided I was clearly too incompetent to separate them, so he reached out to give the front cart one more tug. At that exact moment, I loosened the second cart and the front cart sprang free. It launched forward, catching my thumb between it and a second stationary cart. I heard the pop sound of my thumb dislocating a few seconds before the pain hit me. I yanked my hand free and managed to stifle my choice profanity with less fireable words. It was actually sucking sticks of saffron on a ship. My supervisor witnessed this and still tells people it's his favorite outburst. This member just looks at me like I'm nuts. There, all I needed was a cart. Was that so hard? I'm cradling my oddly shaped hand. Sir, I think you broke my finger. The member just shrugs, huffs, and walks into the warehouse. He looked like he forgot I existed the second he took his eyes off me. My supervisor witnessed the whole thing, but was more worried about me, not the member. He pulled me aside and radioed for ice. Lucky or unlucky, I am very pain tolerant. It's not actually the first joint I've dislocated. I also know the easiest way to end the pain is to just reset the joint. So, I fiddle around with my weirdly dangly thumb until I feel it click back into place. My whole thumb was swollen and turning a lovely shade of purple, but it was back in place. My supervisor got me sent inside to write up an incident report. He sent a posse of employees into the store to find the member and sentence him to banishment. But as it was insanely busy, they never found him. By far the worst customer ever. Well, at least I got an extra day off and a great macabre story out of it. I hope karma gets him and dislocates his shoulder while on a hike in the woods where no helicopter can rescue him, so he has to walk back out again. I'm sorry, accidents can happen, but there is no excuse for that kind of selfish behavior. I had a bogey on my tail in the parking lot. Deploy flares. This happened about a day ago. Honestly, I'm still getting a few random giggles thinking about it. This feels like a pretty good example of entitlement, but I apologize if not. Anyways, I have a local grocery store near me with a decent sized lot. It doesn't usually end up full, but I guess yesterday was crazy for reasons I've yet to care finding out about. There was no space and drivers looking for spots that had even less patience. I got in well enough to the store to do my minor amount of shopping, exiting with barely 2 bags full of snacks and sandwich makings. As I exited, a few of the hovering parking spot snipers were following people from the doors to cars. A guy in a large hatchback tagged me and slowly followed me. Usually, I would dip between cars to the next aisle over, and they don't bother to follow because it gets a little creepy then. I don't like people willfully hovering behind me like that, even less so when in vehicles. Nope, not this guy. He guns it around the aisle and back to me to follow my path. I jump across again, pretending I was an idiot who forgot where I parked. Guess what? Follows me again. This next time, I'm far more blatant about shaking him off, and I double back. He promptly lowers his window and shouts at me, "Just find your freaking vehicle so we can both be happy." He doesn't even give me a chance to reply before rolling his window up again. I figure my bags aren't that heavy, and the cold was enough so that my sandwich meats was fine if I took a bit. So I began wandering aimlessly, letting the guy think I'm finding my vehicle when I knew exactly where it was. He cursed at me a couple more times, and seemed to think he was my designated replacement to a spot. I didn't time it, but I believe he hung on for 10 grueling minutes of my wandering before gunning it hard out of the lot, going straight through a four-way stop and garnering the ire of several drivers. No cops, unfortunately. The funny part, as I left, I could clearly see a few scattered spots he could have taken if he weren't so obstinate or driven by pure spite. The best part though, I walked to the store. What irritates the crap out of me is when they want your spot and they pull up so freaking close behind you, giving you no room to back out. Honestly, I nearly died when you said you walked to the store. You should have just kept walking away and shrugged at the idiot. Karen, he's taken and not into you. So, let's set the stage. I am Ellie, my boyfriend is Tom, Tom's friend is John, John's fiance is Jane, and Jane's sister is the Karen of this story. Don't worry if that's a little bit hard to follow, guys. It will all become very clear and obvious. My boyfriend Tom and his friend John had been friends for years and hung out quite often. John had found love again in Jane and would bring Jane along. Jane is now his fiance. Tom was also starting to bring me along to events. Lately, Jane's sister, Karen, was also starting to tag along. Karen also had 2 children from 2 prior marriages and could not afford babysitting, so she'd bring them along. This prevented us from doing adult activities and talking about adult topics. I'd also noticed Karen constantly giving me a chronic female dog face look. Then she seemed to make every excuse to be around Tom. Once, Jane's car needed new spark plugs. Tom's a pretty good mechanic, so he offered to change them for her. Right behind Jane was Karen. Karen would also make every excuse to get between me and Tom and get me away from her kids. She also started to give me faces that said, "Stay away from him," and "You're the only reason why I can't have him." After John and Jane got married, John and Jane wanted to take Tom and I out to dinner, a double date. We made sure it was just the 4 of us. Well, 10 minutes before dinner, we got word that Karen and her kids would be joining us. At the dinner table, I had to play a math game with Karen's son. Tom was doing the same with her daughter. Out of the blue though, Karen yells in my face, "No math at the dinner table!" but left Tom completely alone. I later asked Tom if he felt that Karen was trying to hit on him, and Tom said yes. Tom assured me that he had no interest in Karen, and even if I wasn't his girlfriend, he still wouldn't have an interest in her. She's just not his type. He wouldn't even consider her as a friend. The only reason why he treats her as a friend is because she's John's sister-in-law. Now, if Karen was a teen or someone in her early 20s, I would have just brushed this whole thing off as immaturity. But Karen was a woman in her mid-30s. Over the course of a year, things progressively got worse. Now, aside from tagging along with John or Jane to see Tom, Karen was now coming to Tom's place alone. Tom kept brushing her off, telling her he was busy. Karen, though, never seemed to get the memo. We would even blatantly mention the book and movie "He's Just Not That Into You" during conversations. At one point, I was even afraid she was going to try and hurt or kill me just to get to Tom. Finally, one day, Karen showed up and Tom's mum was also there. Having known what had been happening, Tom's mum confronted Karen. She said that Tom and Ellie, OP, are together and that Tom has no interest in her. If she shows up unannounced one more time, she will help Tom and I file a restraining order against her. She also said that she had a black belt in karate. She does. And that her husband has a nice arsenal of guns. He does, and isn't afraid to loan us some. Tom also called Jane to tell her that the next time Karen showed up uninvited to a get-together, he and I would be the ones cancelling. Although Karen stopped showing up unannounced, she became super friendly with Tom at parties and get-togethers, especially when I wasn't there. John had a birthday party at Karen's house. I couldn't attend due to work. Tom told me that virtually the whole time, Karen would follow him and offer him a seat, even in the middle of the hall. For those of you wondering why Tom didn't just tell Karen to knock it off, Tom doesn't like confrontation. Tom's also a large guy, 6'5", 300 pounds, but he's a gentle giant and quite a softie. He doesn't like people thinking he's a big and tough guy, so he doesn't show it. Quite often, he did mention to Karen that he had a girlfriend and was happy with her. Like me, he assumed a twice-divorced 30-something-year-old woman would know better. He also talked to John and Jane about Karen. Jane said she would handle her sister, but we're assuming she never did. Why? You'll find out next. This story has a very twisty end. John and Jane divorced after 18 months of marriage. When Jane and John first met, Jane had a lot of credit card debt. She had a sob story about how it was to help her mum. After they got married, John helped pay off all of the debts. After the debt was paid off, Jane started maxing out their credit cards and transferred a majority of the money in their joint bank accounts into her personal. Then she walked out and filed for divorce, leaving John with all the debt. No Jane meant no Karen. We later found out Jane never actually changed her name to John's last name, even though she claimed she had. Looking back, Karen was probably going to do the same thing to Tom. Fortunately, Tom wasn't interested. Tom and I have since gotten married and started a family. So Jane was another Karen, just better at hiding it? I'm sorry for you, but I really pity John too. Imagine having to be married to a Karen and having to deal with another. It's great you're all three of them now though. Ultimately, everyone in the story enabled this behavior. That time I was pushed into a river. So this happened a while back, about a year or two ago. I was sitting by the Murrumbidgee River in an Australian town called Wagga Wagga. At the time, the flow of water was going down, so this created a nice ledge down to the water. The vibe was good and pleasant, but that didn't last long. The following happened. An entitled parent came up to me. "Hello, this is nice, isn't it?" "Yeah, it's pretty relaxing." "Could you just move over there? We want this spot." "Why would I move? You can just sit there if you like." That is no way to respond. Now, just move already. The answer is no, please go away. For a moment, the couple look as if they have accepted defeat and walk away. I then forget about it and just try to enjoy my time. Soon after though, she comes back and asks me again to move. I obviously tell her no. She responds, "Well, in that case," and she puts her foot into the square of my back as I was sitting down and shoves me into the river. At that time, I was a very skinny child, and it doesn't take much to move me. While I was in no serious danger, as the river was slow, it was completely uncalled for. As I got my footing and began to get myself out of the water, I saw her running off in the distance. That was an eventful weekend. Talk about people who deserve to trip and faceplant into a pile of dog crap. But forget the river. You could have been eaten by a croc, snake, or shark in the river. Why isn't that attempted homicide? Stop! My daughter is not cooked yet. The parent here is more idiotic than entitled, but just his first sentence in this story makes him relevant for here, in my opinion. This happened a few years ago in a parking lot of a mall I was going to with my mum. Mid-July, nearly 39 degrees Celsius. When we get out of the car, I saw a movement out of the corner of my eyes in the car behind us. I thought it was a dog at first, and I said to my mum, "What butthole leaves a dog inside a car when it's so hot?" But when I looked again, I saw that it was a baby, a 1-year-old girl sitting at the back. I alarmed my mum, but she thought that I was kidding. I was messing around and telling trashy jokes for the past 30 minutes of the ride, and I was the kind to make some dark humour jokes like that. When she didn't believe me, I bolted inside the mall, saw a security guard and informed him with the number plate I'd memorised. He made a call through the speakers, saying, "If you're not at your car in 2 minutes, say goodbye to your passenger door." I led him to the car, my mum following us, dumbfounded by this actually being true, and also infuriated. The security stopped her from smashing the conductor window right there, and we waited, waving at the girl who seemed conscious through the tainted windows. A man arrived yelling murder when he saw us. "Stop! Stop! That's my car! There's my daughter inside!" The security guard responded, "Yes, you moron, there's your daughter inside. Open the doors now." He unlocked the car and, at the security guard's request, took the baby outside. The car was an oven. She was soaking wet, covered with sweat, and started crying the moment she felt the relatively fresh air outside. The security guard guided us inside and gave a cup of room temperature water to drink for the baby. When the dad got the cup of water in his hands, while the security guard was explaining to the cashier what was happening, the dude had the audacity to drink it first. My mum exploded, screaming at him to give it to his daughter, in such colourful language that I have to this day no idea how to translate it. By the way guys, this all happened in France. He really didn't seem to understand what was happening. He actually tried to go back to his half-full cart when the girl had finished her cup. The security guard stopped him just by putting a hand on his shoulder. He said, and the dude complied at every single word, "Stay right there. My colleague will take your baby, okay? There, sit down. We're waiting for the police and for the ambulance to arrive. Stay calm, breathe, your daughter is okay, but we have to make sure of what happened, okay? Okay." The father, after 2 minutes, said to the cashier, who was holding his daughter and giving her water non-stop, "Maybe give her another cup of water, it's hot." The security guard raised his voice. I straightened my back hearing him, like when your dad yells at your brother and you just want to make sure you don't draw his attention. "Dude, shut the F up, the police are on the way." The father complied again. And we just left. We were just standing there, low-key hoping to see the security guard kick this dad's butt, but we were totally useless for the most part. So I gave my info to the security guard and we went on our merry way. We chilled around the mall for about another half an hour, but when we exited, the guy was gone. The daughter was gone, the car was still there, and the security guard waved us goodbye with a big smile. We just assumed that everything had gone well. I received a phone call 2 days later from the police, and they told me what happened, and we learned that the father was facing a fine, years in prison, and had already lost the custody of his child. Thinking about that day is how I managed to be proud of myself every once in a while. How can this guy be so stupid to leave his baby in a hot car? No matter what the reason, don't leave your child alone in the car. You, though, are a hero. If you hadn't noticed the baby, she would have died from dehydration and overheating. Props to the security guard too. Also, I hope the idiot father enjoys not seeing his child anymore. My entitled mother throws out my ADHD medication, then complains when my grades drop. I'm currently 21 years old, and I've had to live with my very entitled mum my entire life. I have begun to cut contact with her, but she liked to take her anger out on me before I left, and now that burden falls onto my sisters. Luckily though, they're going to college at the end of summer, and my parents are finally getting divorced, so I thought I'd share my stories. So for some backstory, my first semester of high school, 2 of my teachers messed up my grades, lowering them by a whole level, but my GPA wasn't all that improved. However, my parents got called in for a meeting with the vice principal. The meeting went well, as we cleared up the issue and even got me out of the crazy history teacher's class. She taught that God was aliens as if it was fact. Anyway, afterwards, the VP told my parents I might have ADHD. Luckily, my dad took it seriously, and after a year of arguing, I got diagnosed with ADHD combined type and prescribed Vyvanse. After that, my grades improved and a lot about myself made sense. My mum, on the other hand, felt it was too much of a burden. On her. My mum was so entitled that my entire personality should be shaped around what made her look better. To her, I'm not an introvert, I don't love comic books, I don't play video games or D&D, and I don't hate sports. And I especially don't have ADHD. She tried to make me keep it as my little secret. I didn't. Fast forward to finals week my junior year. My medication bottle, which had just been refilled the other day, was now empty. I asked my mum to see if it had been misplaced. She, unabashedly, says she flushed it as it was too embarrassing for her to have a broken kid. I got so angry and walked out of the house, going to school without a word. I texted my dad on a business trip and told him what had happened. As I did, my mum texted me saying if I was going to be a little ungrateful idiot, I can stay away. I informed my dad that I had nowhere to go. Being amazing, he actually got me a hotel to stay in and study in. I tried to focus on my finals for the entire week, but my grades sucked. When my mum found out, she was fuming. She yelled at me for hours about me being an R-word. I put up with this for so long that while I usually broke down and admitted it was right because it was easier and I'd been broken at that point, I was just done. I went to bed while she kept screaming. She cancelled my phone plan for a whole month. She blames me being on the phone and my TV/movie watching. I'm currently a film major, so what do you want me to do? I didn't mind, but eventually it was too inconvenient for her. Even years after this, she still claims it's all in my head and I shouldn't be trying to take my medicine. This is just one of the many entitled moments, but it's not the worst, honestly. I might share some more stories, like the story of my graduation party. Sheesh, I'm glad you don't have asthma or anything life-threatening. Her broken child would die. Thank goodness your father is sane. In your situation, I would be tempted to make all her parental failings as public as possible. If her image means so much to her, let's see how she deals with everyone knowing the truth. Overall, it sounds like a combination of pure ignorance and denial. Not only that you have ADHD, but that you could have gotten it from her genetically.